Right friends, welcome back to news analysis for 7th week. Do the public sector banks need deep surgery? This word was coined by the RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan. So we are going to deliberate on the topic, do the public sector banks need deep surgery? That means, in the words of Raghuram Rajan, there is a serious problem with public sector banks, and we are going to deliberate on the issue. And if you look at what is meant by public sector bank is the bank where government's shareholding is minimum 51%. In most of the public sector banks, government shareholding is around 70%, 60%, 80% like that. But theoretically, public sector institution is the institution where the government shareholding is a minimum 51%. So if you look at from this perspective, all these banks like State Bank of India, Bank of Baroda, Bank of India, Canara Bank, Andhra Bank, Punjab and Sindh Bank, these are all examples of public sector banks. And other category of banks are private sector banks. In private sector banks, I would like to bifurcate them into two types. One is the old generation private sector banks. Old generation private sector banks are the banks which are very small in size and which were left over during nationalization of banks in 1969 and 1980. During 1969 and during 1980, several banks, 14 and 6 were nationalized. At that time, small banks of less than certain asset size were left over, and these are old generation private sector banks. They are small in size, and some examples I have given here: Catholic Syrian Bank, South Indian Bank, Dhanalakshmi Bank, Federal Bank. So these are all examples of old generation private sector banks. If you look at the new generation private sector banks, these are the banks established subsequent to the economic reforms of 1990s. For the first time, private sector banks came into existence in 1994, and subsequently 2 more times licenses were issued. Now this HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank, S Bank, Kotak Mahindra Bank, these are all examples of new generation private sector banks, and they are relatively bigger in size in comparison to old generation private sector banks. And foreign banks operating in India are like Citibank, Standard Chartered and HSBC. So this is broadly the commercial banking system in the country, and please don't forget, public sector banks maintain assets of more than 70% in the banking system, and private sector banks account for around 20%. That means predominant share is held by public sector banks as far as assets are concerned, right friends? And there are two problems facing public sector banks. These two problems are very important. One is the falling CASA ratios. The second one is high gross non-performing assets. Normally, the second problem is known to everyone, because in newspapers several times people talk about high gross non-performing assets of banks, but very few people talk about falling CASA ratios for the public sector banks. So now we are going to deliberate on both these aspects. First one is falling CASA ratios. So what is CASA ratio? Before going into it, I would like to explain you about how the banking system works. Banking system works with deposits and loans. Deposits in banking system are known as liabilities. Please be cautious about this terminology. Deposits in the banking system are liabilities for banks, because when I am depositing money in the banking system, they are required to pay me interest. That's why they are liabilities for the banks. And at the same time, loans are assets to the banks, because if bank is giving loan, they will get interest, they will earn some revenue. That's why loan is asset for the bank. So this differentiation, please don't forget, assets are loans for the banks and liabilities are deposits for the banks. And we deposit money in the banking system. There are several types of deposit accounts. So one is current account deposits, savings account deposits, recurring deposits, fixed deposits, bulk deposits. Bulk deposits are normally for more than 1 crore value. So normally very few people know about bulk deposits, and almost all of you know about remaining these 4 types of deposits. that is current account, savings account, recurring and fixed deposit. And here one important thing, please don't forget, current account deposits are the deposits by the businesses, various corporate houses, small business holders and various companies. They open account, they are known as current accounts. When companies are opening current account deposits, banks will not pay any interest. Banks will not pay any interest on current account deposits. That's why these current account deposits are the most profitable deposits in the banking system. For banks, current account deposits are the most profitable. Similarly, savings account deposits are also profitable because only 4% interest is paid on savings account deposits. But if you look at recurring deposits and fixed deposits, around 8% interest is paid. That's why in the banking system, banks with more current account deposits and savings account deposits are at the advantageous position, and the average interest paid by the banks is known as cost of funds or average cost of funds. So, the banks with less percentage of cost of funds will be in better position. That is possible only when banks have more current account deposits as well as savings account deposits. Right? So, this is cost of funds. Cost of funds is the average interest paid by banks to the depositors, that is the cost of funds. And if you look at the yield, yield is average income they are getting on loans. As I have already told you, loans are assets for banking system. So, banks will give different types of loans, house loans, then mortgage loans, then corporate loans, then personal loans. So, these are all examples of loans, and the average income got by the banks in the banking system is known as yield. So, please don't forget cost of funds and yield, and the difference between yield and cost of funds is net interest margin. The difference between yield and cost of funds is known as net interest margin, and there is not much scope for raising the yield, because if one bank increases interest rates, people will not go there, they will go to other bank. So, that is why banks do not have much possibility of increasing yield, but banks can have possibility of reducing this cost of fund. So, the cost of funds should be kept as low as possible for the banking system so as to get more profits. And net interest margin is the difference between average yield and average cost of funds, and it should be around 3% for viable banking operations. This is there for this new generation private sector banks like HDFC, ICICI, Axis Bank. That's why the CEOs are getting hefty bonuses. But if you look at the public sector banks, this net interest margin is much less than 3%, because this cost of funds in the banking system, these public sector banks are not able to keep them lower except State Bank of India. State Bank of India is somehow able to manage this net interest margin of 3%, but several public sector banks are not able to bring it down. That is why the net interest margin is around 2%, 2.2% for several public sector banks. This is the biggest drawback of public sector banks. That means here the CASA ratio comes into picture. The CASA ratio is the ratio of deposits in the form of current and savings account to total deposits. As I have already told you, this current accounts and savings account deposits are the most profitable deposits in the banking system, but most of the public sector banks are not able to get these current account deposits. That's why the CASA ratio for most of the public sector banks except State Bank of India are around 20%, 25%, 30%. And I have given the chart, but they have come down substantially in recent times. So, the public sector banks are at a disadvantageous position except State Bank of India as far as CASA ratio is concerned. For private sector banks, especially new generation private sector banks, the CASA ratio is around 40% or 45%. That means they have got a high number of this low cost deposits. But if you look at several public sector banks, the CASA ratio is around 20%, 30%. So, the biggest problem faced by public sector banks other than gross non-performing assets is reduction in CASA ratios. So, what is to be done to increase CASA ratio? They have to get more current account deposits. How is it possible? They will get more current account deposits when they are able to attract the attention of business houses. because these current account deposits are by the corporate houses or by businesses. So, I have given here how to improve CASA, capture current account deposits of corporate houses. Second one is ensure savings account deposits of high net worth individuals. Get more savings account deposits from rich people. Improve the public interface of public sector banks. Have more public relations. Ensure business friendly relations with corporate houses. And at the same time, introduce innovative banking products for the corporate sector and upgrade the facilities of internet banking by leveraging technology. If public sector banks are able to do these things, then definitely they will increase the CASA ratio. So, with less CASA ratios, their net interest margin is coming down. That's why their profitability is in question. Right friends, look into the second problem, that is gross non-performing assets. What is meant by non-performing asset? I have already told you asset means a loan in the banking system. When bank is giving loan, then they are required to pay back. Normally every month they have to pay back, except certain category of loans like agriculture. Normally when bank is giving a loan, they are required to pay back every month. But when they are not paying back for more than 90 days, or you can say roughly 3 months, then that loan is classified as non-performing loan. The purpose of loan is bank should get some income. So, the purpose of asset is defeated when they are not paying back. That's why it is called non-performing asset. I once again tell you, asset means loan in the banking system. Right? So, if you look at what are the main reasons for this non-performing assets, most of these non-performing assets are in corporate sector. That means big business houses, businesses, they have taken loan but they are not paying back. What are the main reasons? In the public sector banks, the main reason is inefficient credit appraisal mechanism. That means before giving loan, they have not assessed whether this borrower is able to pay back or not. Second important point is more exposure to corporate loans. If you look at the private sector banks like ICICI Bank or Axis Bank, they maintain balance of loans between corporate sector and retail sector. Retail sector loans means the loans taken by people like you and me. That is house loans, mortgage loans, personal loans. These are all retail loans. And corporate loans are loans given to big corporate houses. Public sector banks have skewed towards corporate loans. Their exposure to corporate loans is very high. But private sector banks have maintained balance between corporate loans and retail loans. That's why they are not that much affected. But these public sector banks have given more loans to corporates. That's why their exposure to corporate sector is very high. That's why public sector banks are in deep trouble now. Third one is there is some stress in sectors like infrastructure, steel industry. Because of a global downturn, steel industry is in crisis, aluminium industry is in crisis, copper industry is in crisis, and at the same time infrastructure bottlenecks are there. Some project was awarded but clearances like environmental, forest and land acquisition are not coming. That's why several loans have gone bad. Global downturn, the economy as a whole is not growing. Some countries are under recession. That is affecting India also to some extent. Then political interference while granting loans. This is the most important aspect of public sector banks. While granting big corporate loans, there is a lot of political interference because this political patronage is there for several borrowers. They are aligned with one political party or other. Banks have not exercised desired prudence and asset bubbles could not be understood properly. Because of excessive foreign flows into the country, asset bubbles are taking place and banking industry is not able to identify which is genuine growth and which is asset bubble. That is another reason. Because of all these reasons, now the corporate houses are not in a position to pay back to the banks. That's why banks are in trouble. Another point I would like to tell you, if the loan goes bad, that means if the corporate house or as a matter of fact any customer is not paying back for more than 90 days, it becomes a non-performing asset. And for all these non-performing assets, public sector banks have to make provisioning, very important aspect. For all these non-performing assets, public sector banks have to make provisioning. That means they have to keep money from their profits aside. Because when the corporate houses are not paying back loans, then banks are losing lot of income. So as to compensate it, banks have to keep money aside from their profits, which is known as the provisioning. So because of provisioning from profits, several banks are nowadays declaring loss in their balance sheets. In recent times, Bank of Baroda reported the largest loss in the banking history. This is because of provisioning. Raghuram Rajan is very critical and Raghuram Rajan is very serious about please ensure provisioning by March 2016. When the loan goes bad, you have to keep certain money aside for provisioning. Please ensure that. Now Raghuram Rajan is ensuring it with the iron hand. That's why the banks are reporting losses in recent times. And when the loan goes bad or when the loan becomes a non-performing asset, what can the banks do? There may be genuine reason, there may be no genuine reason. If there is a genuine reason, banks have taken loans. They are not able to pay back, but there may be genuine reason also because environmental clearance was not given by government, forest clearance was not given by government, coal linkage was not given by government. Under those circumstances, when there is genuine reason, then banks can go for restructuring. Under restructuring of loans, I have given various methodologies to be followed. Under restructuring, what will happen? The repayment period can be extended, then reduction in interest can be done, then moratorium for paying back. That means for certain period, they need not pay back and additional loan can also be given. So this is under genuine reasons. There may be very few cases where genuine reason is there. There is a mechanism called corporate debt restructuring under genuine reasons. But when there is no genuine reason, most of the times there will not be any genuine reason, and when there is no genuine reason, there are 5 aspects which banks can look at for recovering the loan. There are 5 aspects. I am looking at them one by one. First and the foremost is debt recovery tribunals. Bank can approach debt recovery tribunal which was established subsequent to 1993 Act, but the mechanism is very slow, and as per the recent economic survey, almost rupees 4 lakh crore worth of bad debts are locked up in debt recovery tribunals. This mechanism has not worked properly and it led to several litigations, and this is the most inefficient mechanism. The second one is asset reconstruction companies. Banks can sell these bad loans to some asset reconstruction companies, and asset reconstruction companies will look at the methodology for recovering from the companies. Here also what will happen? Asset reconstruction companies will purchase at much lesser rate, so banks will still lose. And second important point is asset reconstruction companies will pay only 15% upfront, and the balance amount they will pay after recovering the loan from the company. So two ways banks are losing. So asset reconstruction companies is the recent phenomena which came up subsequent to 2002 SARFAESI Act, and its efficacy we have to see and we will judge only after few years. Third one is filing of criminal cases, and when bank feels that non-repayment of debt is due to willful default, willfully they are not paying, and nowadays several banks are declaring willful defaulters, then they can file criminal cases against the borrower in courts. Right? Then fourth one is winding up petitions. As per the Companies Act, they can file winding up petitions in court of law. This is also long drawn out procedure. And the last one is strategic debt restructuring. For the loans given by consortium or multiple banking arrangement, you may ask what is consortium? Consortium is 4 or 5 banks coming together and giving loan as a group. That is consortium lending. And when the loan is given by consortium lending or multiple banking arrangement, then there is another option left for the banks, that is strategic debt restructuring, that means banks can take the ownership of the company, that means the loan given can be converted to equity. This is another mechanism available for the bank, and banks are looking at various options available, but so far not much success was met by the banks. And as I have already told you, banks, especially public sector banks, are suffering because of low CASA ratios. That means they are not able to attract deposits from business houses. Second important point is because of high gross non-performing assets, because when the loan goes bad, they have to keep certain amount as provisioning from their profits. That's why they are into losses in recent times. And what is the way out? The way out, it appears to be some serious steps or radical steps are necessary. As Raghuram Rajan rightly pointed out, banks need a deep surgery to come out of these gross non-performing assets. One is amalgamate banks into bigger entities. You amalgamate smaller banks into bigger entities by mergers or acquisitions, and also ensure capital adequacy as per Basel norms. Banks require almost 1.8 lakh crores of capital to ensure Basel norms. Under these circumstances, getting capital from external sources appears to be a daunting task. So that's why now banks are dependent on central government only. And so as to ensure confidence in the banking system, then amalgamate smaller banks into bigger ones and look at the mechanism of capital adequacy as per Basel norms. Second one is strengthen the credit appraisal mechanism. The credit appraisal mechanism, that means before giving the loan, whether the borrower can pay back or not, is not satisfactory in public sector banks. So please ensure credit appraisal mechanism. Please strengthen that mechanism. Then allow banks to work with independence without any political interference. Several corporate houses having political patronage with various parties are the biggest culprits in this problem. So please ensure banks to work without any political interference. And most important point is ensure balanced exposure of loans to retail and corporate sectors. And if possible, this is most important, but if possible, Government of India should come out of majority stake in public sector banks. Some of the public sector banks can be tried for privatization. So these are the things which are required to be done. Some of them, if Government of India is able to ensure, then the confidence level in public sector banks will improve. And as Raghuram Rajan rightly said, banks need a deep surgery. That means some radical steps are required by the government to keep the public sector banking system on track, or otherwise taxpayers' money will have to be used to bail out these banks in future, right? Let us hope that you are clear about this gross non-performing assets, and let us conclude this. And please do join for modules economic survey, railway budget, union budget, which we are presenting separately. Right friends, have a nice day. Thank you.